A drug-crazed, murderous warlord has captured 11 peacekeeping soldiers.
He was a paranoid schizophrenic, mad, basically.
An elite special forces unit is mobilized.
These guys are united in the ability to just keep going when the going is hellish.
A daring and dangerous plan is drawn up.
The odds were against us, totally.
As executions are threatened, the special forces explode into action. They are outnumbered 5 to 1. They are outgunned with heavy artillery. And their enemy believes in black magic. Now on Black Ops, go behind the scenes on a mission so dangerous, they call it Operation Certain Death. August 2000, Sierra Leone, a small war-torn nation on the West African coast. For almost a decade, a loose alliance of murderous rebel gangs has been fighting for control of the country. Their leaders are driven by the prospect of fabulous wealth. This is the world center of the trade in illegal blood diamonds.
Blood diamonds have become an extraordinarily important factor in the violence which was going on.
There are daily raids on undefended rural villages. The rebels often take all the children away, turning them into child soldiers. Those left behind were often punished by amputation.
They would chop arms off short sleeve or long sleeve style. So short sleeve was above the elbow, long sleeve was below the elbow. The aim of doing so was to spread terror across the country in some strange way to prove their power.
One of the most brutal of these gangs is a group of about 1,000 fighters known as the West Side Boys.
The West Side Boys, drugs and alcohol, that's how they fueled their war.
They were rounding up local women, and there's little doubt that sex and drugs featured quite prominently in their behaviour and activities. So they were a dangerous group of people simply because they were totally unpredictable.
If that wasn't bad enough, they had this belief that voodoo would protect them to such an extent it would make them bulletproof.
One man who served nearly 2 years with the West Side Boys is 26-year-old Black Zorro. He was recruited by the rebels, aged just 14, and rose to become a trusted junior officer.
Well, the smoke, the weed.
Well, we used to smoke plenty of marijuana. And as for drink, we had lots of homemade strong alcohol called hard wine. Cocaine was sometimes available, but heroin was all over the place. If you went to the jungle at that time, you would find everybody high on heroin. I was often high all day. The drugs made me feel strong and ready for battle. As soon as I took them, I was ready for any fight.
To save Sierra Leone from total collapse, a global coalition intervenes with military force. British troops in particular play a leading role in keeping the peace and in training the local army to stand on its own.
We were demonstrating a wider commitment of the Western world to what at the time was a struggling democracy in a very poor part of Africa. So I think there was an important symbolic value in our intervention.
On a quiet Friday afternoon, 11 military training advisors from Britain's Royal Irish Regiment set out on a routine patrol. At this junction, their commander, Major Alan Marshall, decides to turn down a dirt road leading into the jungle. He's heading straight into the heart of West Side Boys territory.
I don't know why they left the main road and came into our territory. It was a no-go zone for anybody except us.
The unofficial reason may be that he was actually there with a mission to try and scope out what their forces were like, how powerful they were, what weapons they were armed with, and what they would be like as a fighting force to come up against.
The British don't realise they've already been spotted by West Side Boy scouts hiding in the forest.
We saw them as a major threat. They came to our camp without authorization. We didn't know their intentions, and we thought they were here to spy on us. So we couldn't just let them leave.
They reach the riverside, where one side of the rebel base is situated, and immediately they get there, they're surrounded by what can only be described as a seething, screaming mob of West Side Boys.
Heavily outnumbered and with no means of escape, the soldiers are forced to surrender.
It's very clear very quickly that this is not a friendly situation.
The well-trained, well-armed soldiers are taken prisoner by this crazed mob of drugged-out jungle gangsters.
We arrested the soldiers to get attention from the international community. We wanted to stop hiding in the jungle, and we thought we could use them to get what we wanted.
The 11 British soldiers are beaten, stripped of their valuables, and taken off to a stinking jungle hut. At the Ministry of Defence headquarters in London, news of the missing soldiers reaches Britain's Chief General.
We weren't quite sure just how serious it was to start with. I knew about the West Side Boys. I'd been to Sierra Leone, I'd been briefed about them, but I wasn't quite sure what they would do.
General Guthrie and Defence Secretary Hoon convene a crisis meeting in their Situation Room, deep in the basement.
Problem was, how were we going to get these people who'd been kidnapped, who were in tremendous danger of either being tortured, killed, or split up around Sierra Leone? So there was a real urgency about this.
They knew nothing. They had no intelligence, they had no eyes on the rebel base, they didn't know the rebel numbers, they didn't know what weaponry they had, and most worryingly of all, they didn't know whether the British soldiers would get killed in the rescue operation.
The British are haunted by the memory of a disastrous rescue mission in Africa 7 years earlier. This was the infamous Black Hawk Down incident. 18 American servicemen were killed when their helicopters were shot down by a rocket and their bodies paraded through the streets of Mogadishu, Somalia.
Obviously, reports are going to the Prime Minister. He would be briefed.
And I remember him saying, well, is this very dangerous? I said, yes, very dangerous. Are people likely to be killed? I said, almost certainly.
Terrified of the fallout from a failed rescue, the British government decides to try to negotiate for the hostages' release.
I was perfectly content for negotiations to be begun, but I have to say in the background as well, we were always preparing to take military action to release them.
If negotiations fail, there will be no choice but to take the hostages back by force. 3 days into the crisis, a team of specialist negotiators from Scotland Yard arrive in Africa. They will try to peacefully secure the hostages' release. Leading the talks on the rebel side is their commander, a 24-year-old warlord calling himself Brigadier General Fode Calais.
Calais was paranoid schizophrenic. He was certainly very paranoid and very deluded.
Fode Calais was the best commander we had. He was a skilled soldier and he led from the front.
He was so deluded to the extent that he believed his rebel group had the power to, for example, force the British out of Sierra Leone.
Everybody knew that when he gave orders, you had to follow them because he took responsibility for all his soldiers.
At his first meeting with the negotiators, Calais makes a rambling series of demands. These range from simply wanting an amnesty for the West Side boys to outrageously insisting all British leave the country. Most insanely of all, Calais himself wants to be named president of Sierra Leone.
In some cases, it will be quite apparent from an early situation that the prospect of a successful negotiated solution with the victims coming out unharmed is low. That may be a factor of history of the group, the demands and the nature of the demands that are being made, the political ideology. It may be from a range of factors that you can make that judgment.
The negotiators are walking a dangerous tightrope. Calais' demands can never be met, but the team must make him believe they might. The hope is that as long as he keeps talking, the hostages will be kept alive.
Clearly they didn't wish to kill them at the outset, and they saw some value in them, and that's why they kept them alive. So that was the good news. The bad news in this situation is the unpredictability and the volatility. So in the blink of an eye, you can move from a situation where you have stable, well-treated hostages to them being killed.
To confirm that the hostages are being well treated, the negotiators insist on meeting with Major Marshall, the patrol leader, in person. Calais agrees. It's a decision he will come to regret.
Major Marshall, the man who was in charge of the British patrol, had been captured. He recognised in these meetings an opportunity to pass over some vital intelligence in a clandestine fashion to the British side.
The people who'd been abducted here were professional military people. They foresaw where this was going.
What he had done is, during the various walkabouts that the rebels had proudly given them of the base, saying, there is our anti-aircraft weapons and there are our mortars and these kind of things, during those walkabouts, Major Marshall had noted down every single defence that he could see. Back in their room, where they were locked in captivity, he had drawn up a detailed map of the rebel base, mapping out all the positions and all their strengths. And he'd taken that piece of paper, rolled it up very tightly, and poked it inside a pen lid.
When Major Marshall meets one of the men from Scotland Yard, they shake hands and make a secret exchange. If Calais spots what they are doing, it will be a disaster. But incredibly, the negotiator manages to put the object in his pocket without being noticed.
I wouldn't characterise these as a highly professional group of hostage takers. The fact that they allowed that handshake allowed an exchange of intelligence. That was not a shrewd move on their part.
It's an unexpected but crucial breakthrough. At last, the British have some intelligence to begin planning a rescue mission. And there is only one group that has skills to carry it out. Britain's legendary Special Forces unit, the SAS. They are the pioneers in the art of black ops, with a history stretching back as far as the Second World War.
The SAS, the British Special Air Services, they're the special operations force that we modeled all of our special operations after. They set the model for the rest of us to follow.
Through the years, they have constantly adapted and improved, playing a crucial role in every major British conflict, from the streets of Northern Ireland, to the polar wastes of the Falkland Islands, to the deserts of Iraq. The SAS are famous for being ready to fight in any environment and to carry out the missions with absolute secrecy.
Go! Go, go, go!
Small unit, just a few hundred people, the elite of the elite. They have to go through a brutal entry course to prove that they measure up. It washes the majority of the applicants out.
Those that make it through the infamous selection procedure are honoured by having the SAS wings and dagger pinned or badged to their army berets.
I joined the army to be a soldier and take up the duties that that includes. And as a badged member of the SAS, that is about as pure as the driven snow as you can get in terms of soldiering.
The SAS have two particular specialities. One is storming difficult targets. In London, in 1980, they famously rescued 19 hostages, breaking a terrorist siege of the Iranian embassy.
The SAS pioneered the art of bursting onto a scene and rescuing hostages. That means things like fast roping from helicopters, breaching doors, throwing in a stun grenade to stun everyone inside, and then quickly firing and taking all of the hostile parties out, leaving the civilians. That is what they perfected.
Go, go, go!
The training for releasing hostages is quite intense, as you can imagine, because there's not a lot of room for error. You know, you don't get second chances when you're dealing with people's lives.
They don't have all the special gear that the Americans have. What the SAS guys will tell you is, yes, what we lack in gear, we have to make up for in skills.
Their other great skill is jungle warfare.
Jungle warfare is, in many people's eyes, one of the purest forms of fighting. You've got to really get atoned in with your surroundings. There's no open spaces, it's closed in, it's a tight environment, so it's on top of you.
Now the unit was preparing to put both of these specialities into practice and start planning an audacious rescue using the smuggled map. The crisis has been dragging on for almost 7 days, but the negotiators continue to try and seek a peaceful settlement. Calais is now asking for something more reasonable, some medicine for his camp, and a satellite telephone so he can call the BBC and announce his grievances to the world. The British quickly agree if they can have some of the hostages in return.
There was a major negotiating success. 5 hostages were released in exchange for a satellite phone and medicines. Now, that was a win-win situation because, one, it is worthwhile having effective and good communications, you know, with the hostile elements. 2, medicines are a good idea, particularly if they're going to be used to treat any of your individuals. And 3, it provides intelligence opportunity.
It's a masterstroke, which will change the course of the operation. Almost half of the men are now free. What's more, the British can use the signal from the satellite phone to pinpoint Calais' secret hideout. Unknown to him or anyone outside a select inner circle, a task force has arrived in Sierra Leone to begin secret preparations for a rescue. It consists of about 300 men. Most are from Britain's frontline airborne force, the Parachute Regiment, known to all in the British Army as simply the Paras. But they are merely there as support troops. The rescue itself will be handled by a 50-strong team from the elite Special Air Service, the SAS, and about 20 colleagues from the British Royal Navy's own Special Forces unit, the SBS, or Special Boat Service. To avoid arousing any suspicion, their mission is given an innocuous codename, Operation Barras.
I'm often asked, how on earth does Britain choose these rather curious names for its operation, in contrast to the United States that talks about Operation Freedom and has rather dramatic names for their military activities. And the answer is, I'm afraid, rather prosaic and probably very British, which is that we allow a computer to generate randomly names that are then, providing they're appropriate, allocated accordingly.
With the tacit support of the Sierra Leone government, the men of Operation Barras establish a covert base just outside the capital.
It wasn't until that we moved forward into Sierra Leone itself that the focus starts coming down there and you start thinking, right, this is going to happen. Your kit's being packed as to what you want to take in with you. You're beginning to get a bit more intelligence. Briefing boards are going up. We need to be ready for it.
The SAS start gathering as much intelligence as they can about the rebels and their jungle hideout. Their preferred plan is to send a small team upriver at night in SBS boats. Moving in total darkness and total silence, the rescue team can secretly enter the rebel camp, sneak into the hostage hut, and quickly escape with the prisoners hopefully without a shot being fired. As the troops wait for the green light, they begin rehearsing for the mission.
There was a floor plan built at the village so that you knew roughly how far you had to go, what your limits of your particular arcs were and that sort of stuff. An arc being where you can fire and where you can't fire. At the height of battle, it could become quite confusing as to who's where and who's doing what.
But there is still no permission to mount the rescue. The final go can only come from Defence Secretary Jeff Hoon in London. The fate of the 6 remaining British hostages hangs in the balance. If a bargain cannot be struck for their lives, there will be an epic battle to free them.
Well, at times they make cocky.
The Brits were cocky. We would give them orders and they would say, no, we won't accept your command. They were extremely stubborn, actually. Sometimes we would talk to them, tell them what to do, and they would ignore us. They really did not make life easy for themselves. Sometimes Calais would have to slap them around a bit to make them understand. He would shake them up and hit them hard. He had to treat them roughly, so they knew he was in charge.
Jog and push and, you know.
The key thing would be reading the mood music, you know, whether it was positive or it's negative, you know, in terms of their attitude, because the volatility is the key element in this, and whether they're going to behave in a rational and thoughtful sort of way, or whether they're escalating to a point where it's clearly never going to be resolved, you know, amicably.
Defence Secretary Jeff Hoon has still not authorised a full-scale rescue mission. But he has given the go-ahead for a secretive and highly dangerous operation. A 4-man SAS surveillance team stealthily enters the jungle. Their job is to provide more detailed intelligence about conditions in the rebel base.
In the first place, they had to be inserted around the village. Actually, it meant that some of them spent several days in swamp, crawling through some of the most unpleasant conditions I think anyone could face.
Moving and operating in total silence and advancing just a few feet each hour, the men slowly approach rebel territory, looking for a concealed position where they can see, but not be seen.
That team was tasked with setting up an observation post, an OP. An OP, it's like a grave dug in the jungle floor.
They know how to quietly get into a scene if necessary, whether it's marching into a jungle invisibly and sitting in an observation post under a tarp for 3 weeks, staring at a target so nobody knows they're there. That's what they do.
You dig a pit, you jump in the pit, you cover it with vegetation, and you lie there for as long as it takes to keep eyes on the base until either the mission is called in, and it happens, or the mission's called off and you withdraw.
This kind of surveillance is another SAS speciality, and it takes incredible reserves of patience and skill. The men must eat, sleep, and maintain their watch for days on end, making only the smallest of movements.
Throughout the special operations world, they have this expression, the quiet professionals. And these guys, when they're out on the mission, that's really what they are.
Straight away, they discover 3 pieces of bad news. Firstly, the captives are no longer in the rebel base where they were first taken hostage. They have been moved across a wide river to a smaller camp, even deeper into the jungle. Second, the original plan for the assault along the river will not work. It is full of concealed sandbanks, and the Special Forces boats cannot use it. On top of that, the jungle is so thick that an approach by land is also impossible. The only option is a full frontal assault by helicopter.
If we'd have sneaked up and not fired a shot, taken everybody down without killing anybody, then that would have been the preferred option. As it was, it couldn't pan out that way. We couldn't get to them. We couldn't do it that way. So, you know, we had to go in and give them a bloody nose.
The only helicopter up to the job is one of the biggest in the world. The twin-rotor HC-2 Chinook. But an air assault using one of these beasts has its own specific problems.
Well, the obvious thing about a helicopter is that they are very noisy, and the element of surprise is lost if the enemy can hear a helicopter coming at distance.
Chinooks can carry a huge payload, but they're also slow, hard to maneuver, and easy to spot. Hence their unofficial nickname, the Flying School Bus.
If a Chinook gets hit and knocked out of the sky with a large number of SAS people in it, it would be very serious.
To make matters worse, most of the West Side Boys group remain in their main base on the south side of the river. They have a battery of heavy weapons, including rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and mortars, any of which could easily shoot a Chinook out of the sky or rain artillery fire down on the hostage camp across the river. Any rescue mission would quickly turn into a suicide mission. The SAS commanders must rethink the entire operation. Time is running out. Rebel leader Fode Calais is getting more and more impatient with the endless rounds of negotiations.
It could change in the blink of an eye. It was highly unpredictable, highly volatile, and groups like this had already killed many times before. Even if they were compliant today, you could not in any way be assured of the safety of the hostages tomorrow or the day after.
The negotiators from Scotland Yard call Calais daily on his satellite phone. But with each conversation, he becomes more unpredictable. He is spending his days taking drugs and drinking heavily. By the start of every afternoon, he is thoroughly drunk. Eventually, due to the lack of electricity in his camp, Calais' phone runs out of battery and goes dead.
We had a message saying negotiations had failed.
The safety of the hostages is now at serious risk.
One evening, he called us all out and said, "We're going to shoot one of them."
He took Major Marshall, the British commander, to the edge of the jungle, made him kneel. They put an assault rifle to his head and basically pulled the trigger.
Calais' rifle is empty. But next time, in all likelihood, it will be loaded. When news of this outrage arrives in London, Jeff Hoon decides that the time for talking is finally over.
We were certainly receiving very detailed information about what was going on inside the huts where our men were being held prisoner. And I think one of the key pieces of information I received is that they were being subject to mock executions, that weapons were being pointed at them, apparently being fired. And that kind of behavior was totally unacceptable as far as I was concerned.
Operation Barras is a go.
Well, the SAS, I think everybody in the army would admit, are probably the most suitable people to do this. They are trained in special operations. They're trained in rescuing people who have been kidnapped. They've done it in other places.
Everyone involved in the mission knows the odds are stacked heavily against them. In fact, the mission is so dangerous, the men on the ground have given it their own name.
When they realised they could only go in via air, that was when the men of the SAS, the men who were tasked to go in and do this hostage rescue, coined the phrase, the nickname for the mission, Operation Certain Death.
Assuming they even make it to their target without being shot out of the sky, the rescue force will be outnumbered more than 5 to 1. And their enemy, who believe black magic makes them invincible to bullets, will fight fearlessly and recklessly.
In a battle, you don't check to see who you've killed. When I fire my weapon, there will be many victims. I don't know who is dead or alive. All I know is when I pull the trigger, the bullets will be flying around the jungle, and no one will be left in front of me.
The men of Operation Barras are assembling before dawn to launch their attack, a dangerous air assault on a well-defended jungle hideout. The mission will be personally overseen by General Charles Guthrie, one-time commander of the SAS, now head of all Britain's armed forces.
We had a very good plan, but it was a risky plan, because in these things you never quite know what the enemy are going to do.
Guthrie makes things plain to his political masters. The mission to rescue 6 British hostages is likely to incur heavy casualties.
General Guthrie made clear that this operation was not without risk, that he could not guarantee that we would not lose soldiers in the process.
In an attempt to overcome the staggering odds facing the rescue team, General Guthrie signs off on a new strategy: 2 simultaneous attacks. First, a team of about 50 elite SAS troops will approach the small jungle camp on the north bank, Gaberi Bana. This is where the captives are located, along with rebel commander Fode Calais. To surprise the rebels, they will fast rope down from the hovering choppers, landing just feet from the hostage hut.
We didn't know what to expect, so all the time that we know where the hostages are is the time that we have to act in, because if they take them somewhere else, it's jungle for jungle for jungle.
At the same time, the force of 150 paratroopers, who have been waiting in reserve, will launch the second attack. Landing by helicopter on the south side of the river, they will strike at the main West Side Boys base, Magbeni, to distract the large force of rebels there and disable their heavy weaponry. The mission is planned for dawn on the 8th of September, the 15th day of the crisis. But at the very last moment, there's a hitch. The SAS observation team, hiding in the jungle, sends an urgent message.
The mission was originally planned for first light on a Saturday morning, but in fact those who had been literally crawling through swamp in order to get near to the huts and near to the village took longer than they had planned.
The plan requires the observation team to move within a few feet of the hostage house to provide covering fire, but they must move at night, at an agonizingly slow pace, to avoid being spotted. They ask for a 24-hour delay.
Because of the time it took to get into position, it actually was delayed until Sunday morning.
Nights before the attack,
The night before the attack, everybody was out of it. We had all been partying. I was in my hut taking lots of drugs because it was raining outside. We had no idea what was about to happen.
One day later, Operation Certain Death finally lifts off. They fly out to sea and muster off the coast.
I don't think there was a guy there that didn't leave a letter with one of his best mates to give to his loved ones should something happen.
At the Ministry of Defence headquarters in London, all that Jeff Hoon can do now is wait and hope.
I think it's important to bear in mind that we were not sitting watching live TV footage of what was taking place. Essentially, I knew that the operation was underway. I knew that the operation would proceed along the lines that had been briefed to me.
2 Chinook helicopters are carrying the 50-strong SAS contingent, followed by a third with the first wave of support troops from the Paras. Each SAS man is carrying more than 80 pounds of kit, including his body armor, his M14 assault rifle, and enough ammunition and grenades for hours of fighting.
You know your job inside out by then, so you know what your mate's going to be doing, you know where he's going when he gets off the chopper, you know what you're going to do if he doesn't manage to go that way. The plan's in your face now, it's stored up here, you know, you're just waiting for that ramp to come down now and you're off.
On operations, you get psyched up. There's no question about that. Everybody wants it. I mean, you get a sort of working together, cooperation, which is quite difficult to explain because it's extraordinarily dangerous what you're doing. But, you know, well-trained soldiers get on and do it.
After a 10-minute flight, the 6 helicopters are on the final approach to their targets.
The 4-man observation team were in contact with the pilots and telling them, you can come in, there's no one moving, there's no one moving, it's light enough to see, it's light enough to see. And so the airborne assault force flew up to the rebel base using the river upon which the rebel base was situated to hide their progress as they came in. So the helicopters were invisible to the naked eye, but far more importantly, you couldn't hear them because the jungle to either side of the river masked the approach of the assault.
At 6:30 in the morning, the thunderous noise overhead rouses the rebels.
Early in the morning, I stepped outside my hut, and as I was looking around, I heard a strange sound. I turned to see a huge helicopter coming in. Then men started to drop down from ropes onto the ground. By now, the helicopter was overhead, making a huge wind. I was scared.
The most urgent objective is the hostage hunt. The entire operation hinges on getting to the captive soldiers before rebels get there first and execute them. It is now that the reconnaissance team, who have been lying almost motionless for a week in the jungle, finally break cover. Just in time to kill the rebels guarding the hostage hut.
They fight their way in there and they scream out, British soldiers, British soldiers!
British soldiers!
And so the hostages know it's the friendly force coming to rescue them that they've been dreaming of happening for some time.
Across the river in the main rebel stronghold of Magbeni, the support force from the parachute regiment is slowly approaching their target. Their mission is to prevent the core group of West Side boys interfering with the rescue.
Operations nearly always have unforeseen consequences, and you've got to be aware of that and be prepared to react.
Chinook comes in, hovers over this flat area of ground. First guy jumps out, first para jumps out with his weapons and his Bergen on his back, and lo and behold, he lands up to his neck in a swamp.
That initially caused some problems for the operation because men were literally sinking into the ground.
There's nothing worse than if a plan does go wrong and you just are left high and dry.
But as soon as they reach the edge of the base, disaster strikes.
Very quickly, things go really quite badly wrong. A mortar round goes up and lands in the tree under which the command element of the parachute regiment guys is situated. It explodes in the tree, so it's like an airburst. And very, very quickly, you've got the whole command element of that parachute regiment force injured and taken out and needing evacuating.
The only member of the 8-man command unit to escape serious injury is a young officer, Captain Danny Matthews. He now finds himself directing a major battle for the first time. Quickly regrouping his troops, he orders them to eliminate the greatest source of danger, the mortar. By this time, in the smaller jungle camp on the north side of the river, the rebel army is now fighting back. The SAS realize that the battle on the ground is not going according to their carefully orchestrated plan.
When I left the chopper, we took fire from a direction that we hadn't planned to take fire from. We all ended up stacked up in a completely different way, facing a completely different part of the village than we were going to because we took so much fire from behind.
I tried to gather my group together on the edge of the forest and take cover behind one of the buildings. I could see things were getting very hot, so we moved up.
We knew how heavily armed the West Side boys were. There is little doubt either that they fought, and they fought hard once they realised what was happening.
The disciplined special forces managed to hold the rebels at bay long enough for the hostages to be escorted to the helicopter landing zone.
You can't afford to switch off. It would be a terrible shame to go through the village, rescue all the hostages, have a marvellous day out, and then get shot getting on chopper on the way out.
The mission appears to be on the verge of success when one SAS soldier is hit by a wild spray of gunfire.
A soldier called Brad Tinian, who was a legend within the SAS, was hit and seriously wounded.
There are several serious casualties on one side of the river. A dying SAS trooper on the other side, and although the hostages have now been freed, they are still not out of danger. The success of Operation Certain Death hangs in the balance.
These guys are united in the ability to just keep going when the going is hellish.
Although the rebels could not shoot the British helicopters down, they have inflicted serious damage on the two units fighting their way through the jungle.
The odds were against us, totally. We flew into their village, into their backyard, with two of the biggest helicopters in the world. By rights, I mean, if they'd have been switched on, they should have smashed those choppers straight out of the sky. Would have been lucky to get anybody in there.
One of the men, Trooper Brad Tinian, is seriously wounded.
Tremendous efforts were made, I know, to save his life. A helicopter pilot picked him up and took him out to a ship that we had stationed off Sierra Leone. Sadly, he had died before further medical attention could be given to him.
By now, all 6 hostages have also been flown out to the waiting ship. In London, General Guthrie, himself a former Special Forces soldier, receives a coded message from the field just before appearing live on breakfast television.
We decided to attack the place where the hostages were being kept at 6:30 this morning. So the situation is still very confused. There is fighting going on, but the first indications are that the hostages are safe. I don't know what condition they're in, but they are safe.
The hostages may be safe, but the battle is not yet over.
The men who went to join the battle were all killed. Many of them were sharing a hut with me. I lost most of my friends.
Objective number 2 for the SAS is the rebel leader, Fode Calais. One of the 4-man fire teams is assigned to take down his house.
They basically kick open the doors and clear each of the rooms, and in one of those rooms there's a bed, like a wooden bed with a mattress on top of it. And they're about to leave the room because there's no one else in there when some smart guy thinks to look under the bed, and cowering underneath the bed, not able to move, not able to say a word, is the West Side Boys leader, Fode Calais, the guy who was demanding that he be made the president of Sierra Leone.
With their leader now a prisoner himself, the rest of the West Side Boys melt away into the forest.
We had no support left, so there was no way we could offer resistance in our part of the village. All I heard was the sound of British heavy weapons. So I decided the best thing to do was escape while I could.
Black Zorro and several others fled into the jungle and ran as far as they could from the battlefield. The British were now left standing alone. Today, Black Zorro is returning to the village of Gaberi Bana, where the hostages were kept, and where he lived for almost 18 months as a West Side Boy fighter. It is the first time he has been back to this place since the battle with the British 12 years ago.
This is the place where Calais was living, the commander in charge of this place. Well, it was destroyed. A lot of bullet shots, a lot of damage. Because the helicopter came right here to bombard this area, to kill Calais. This is where I was living. Here was my room where I slept. They wiped it, but I wrote my name here before, Black Zorro. Early in the morning, I woke up from my room Straight away, I went over here. I was standing here, relieving myself. I heard the sound from that side. Straight away, I saw the helicopters, people dropping from them. I rushed into the house. I tried to wake up my friends. I took my AK-47 and I stood there. There were gunshots all over, so we tried to resist, to return fire, but it was too late. The incoming fire was too heavy and the British were all over the place. So I decided to escape to the bush. I ran and cleared a path by shooting heavily into the trees. I shot about 30 bullets into this area to try and clear the way. They went right over there, this way. I went through the bush. I left behind heavy firing. The British were everywhere. It was risky because we were being ambushed from all sides, so I managed to escape by the will and the power of God.
All of the hostages from the Royal Irish Regiment made a full recovery. Many still serve in the British military to this day. Fode Calais, the rebel leader, was put on trial in Freetown and sentenced to 50 years in prison. The other West Side boys that survived the battle joined a reconciliation process and returned to civilian life. Today, Black Zorro is homeless, living on the streets of Freetown, the capital city.
Well, the West Side boys broke up and everybody went their own ways. Those that survived had to keep surviving. Those that were captured had to face up to prison. And that was the end of us. We finished now.
Operation Barras had a massive impact on Sierra Leone. In the months that followed, rebels all over the country laid down their arms.
It sent a message to the rebels which was clear and could not be misinterpreted. If you continue to do what you do, we will come after you and we will hunt you down in your rebel bases, wherever you are, in the jungle, with ultimate force, and your days are numbered.
Today, Sierra Leone is still poor, but it is peaceful. This one mission brought a decisive end to years of conflict. And it's all due to the skill and bravery of the SAS. An international flight hijacked by armed terrorists is flown to hostile territory.
Every few hours they say that they are going to execute us.
Demands are made. Deadlines are set. An elite special forces team known as the Unit moves into action.
To kill someone is relatively simple. To rescue someone is much more complicated.
As time is running out, a daring plan is launched from thousands of miles away.
I think it'll stand as one of the most bold special forces operations in modern history.
Now on Black Ops, behind the scenes of one of the most daring rescue missions ever made. Operation Thunderbolt. Air France Flight 139 from Tel Aviv to Paris makes a stopover in Athens. On board the airplane are 248 passengers and crew members.
I was putting nail polish on my nails, and we were talking to the girl sitting in front of us. I didn't suspect anything.
Shortly after takeoff, terrorists storm the cockpit. One of them takes over the radio and announces the flight is hijacked. No one knows where it's headed. In Jerusalem, a routine cabinet meeting is interrupted, and the message is delivered to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Defense Minister Shimon Peres is also getting the news.
Maid came in and handed me a very small piece of information that said that an Air France plane was hijacked.
Good evening. An Air France jet was hijacked by Palestinian guerrillas today.
The hijacking of Flight 139 is just the latest in a string of terrorist attacks targeting Israeli citizens. 4 years earlier, in 1972, 11 Israeli athletes were killed in an attack on their compound at the Munich Olympics. In the same year, terrorists shot and killed 26 passengers waiting for their luggage in Tel Aviv airport. And in 1974, terrorists sieged a high school in northern Israel, killing 22, most of them young students. Immediately after the hijacking, Israeli special forces are put on high alert. The authorities are expecting the plane to arrive in Tel Aviv. But the hijackers have a different plan. One of them is a trained pilot. He instructs the captain to divert the flight to Libya.
He knew exactly how to fly an airplane. And he had the maps that he needed, and he followed our pilot to see that he's taking him wherever he wants to go.
On the ground in Libya, one desperate passenger pretends to be having a miscarriage in an attempt to escape. She is released and immediately met by Israeli intelligence officers. They learn from her that there are 4 terrorists, 2 German and 2 Palestinian. They are armed with guns and grenades.
The plane continued to fly, and we didn't know to which destination.
It is headed to Africa. In the early hours of June 28th, Air France Flight 139 lands in Entebbe Airport in Uganda, more than 2,000 miles from Tel Aviv. At first, the passengers think the crisis is coming to an end.
They told us we are going to be released in Uganda.
But as soon as they get off the plane, their hopes are dashed.
There were 2 rows of Ugandan soldiers standing with guns, and we were in the middle, and they led us into the terminal of Entebbe. That was the second very big shock.
We were sure that we are free to go. And then we saw that lots of Ugandan soldiers are waiting for us there, and 6 more terrorists were waiting for us there.
Instead of being released, they are led to an unused terminal in Entebbe Airport.
They told us that we are going to stay there, and later they brought us mattresses and blankets.
Soon they receive a visit from Uganda's unpredictable and ruthless ruler, Idi Amin. He offers his services as a mediator in the crisis.
Negotiations between the hijackers and Ugandan officials, led by President Idi Amin, were at a stalemate, but the hijackers did allow the plane's 256 passengers to wait in the airport lounge.
In Jerusalem, the cabinet ministers are wondering if Amin can be trusted.
We didn't know yet. Is it in coordination with the Uganda people? Was it prearranged? We didn't have the slightest idea.
The hijackers still haven't issued any demands. The passengers, unsure of their fate, spend a nervous night in Entebbe Airport. In the morning, the terrorists make an announcement.
They are going to separate part of us to the other room, and it will be more comfort for all of us. It sounds reasonable.
They started to call us by names. After the first few names, we understood that they are calling the Israeli people and the Jewish people. It was a very frightening moment.
For many passengers, the process of a selection between Jews and non-Jews bears echoes of the Holocaust.
It's such a despair, it's such a feeling of, that's it, the end, because you can't do anything. And we knew that they are going to release all the others.
They separated between Jews and non-Jews. The fact that they are Germans and they made a separation really made me outraged.
In Jerusalem, the leaders anxiously follow the news reports from Entebbe as the terrorists announce their demands.
But the hijackers threatened to kill the more than 200 remaining hostages, including 7 Americans, unless Israel and 4 other countries release 53 pro-Palestinian prisoners.
The hijackers set a deadline for their demands.
The terrorists send us a message that if they are not going to get an answer in the next 12 hours or 10 hours, they'll start to execute passengers one by one on an hourly basis.
Israel has a long-standing policy not to give in to terrorists' demands. Defense Minister Shimon Peres knows he needs to start setting in motion a response.
If we can find a political way, why not? But parallel, I started to look for a military solution.
Peres will turn to the Israeli Defense Forces. They have a reputation as one of the best trained armies in the world. Its elite special forces units have carried out many daring operations.
They had a force that was capable. The consequence of them failing, I think, was great. The consequence of the success was even greater.
But Uganda is 2,000 miles away. Staging a rescue mission so far from home and under such a tight deadline seems impossible. The Israeli leaders are trying to devise a response, but they desperately need more time.
I thought we have a chance with a little bit of daring, or much daring, and decisiveness, and surprise, and ingenuity to do the job.
Any operation would be extremely risky.
This was a push for an emerging country. It happened at a period of time where you had an emerging nation whose destiny was uncertain.
The intelligence available is minimal. They don't know how many terrorists are involved, or if they have the backing of the Ugandan army. They could be facing thousands in hostile and unfamiliar territory. But Defense Minister Peres is pushing for a plan.
The first I called in was the commander of the Air Force, who I like very much. I called in the other young commanders. They says, look, we have to look at the map. We have to check where are the radar stations. How can we land?
Joshua Shani, one of Israel's top pilots, gets an urgent phone call.
It's very unusual to get a direct call from the commander of the Air Force. And what he wanted to know is very basic information about the range, about the payload that we can take, about the fuel needed, about the route that it's possible or not to do. I gave him one by one everything he needed to know, and then he said, come back to the headquarters, we'll start planning.
The planners need to know how big a threat the Ugandan army is. They turn to Muki Betze, a commander with Israeli Special Forces, who knows the African forces well.
I was sent to train the paratroopers unit for 2 years. They asked me, Muki, what do you know about the Ugandan army? I said, listen, the Ugandan army is not exactly a well-trained army. Not like the IDF in any case.
The planning group considers several options. One involves dropping boats and a parachute force into Lake Victoria by Entebbe.
We've tested parachuting into Lake Victoria, but we didn't have any experience with such things. Our Navy SEALs tried it, and the boats exploded.
technically, we did not do well in the exercise. That one boat was blown up, and it was kind of, and the second round was better, but say 50% is not good enough for an operation like this.
The Prime Minister sends them back to work.
And he did not approve that operation. He thought it will be very risky, and it was not a wise plan. Some of the military people were very disappointed that that plan was not approved. And he stated, I want another plan as soon as possible. And he set specific guidelines to the plan.
The risks of a failed operation start to sink in.
I thought if it will fail, it will be a boost to all terrorists. It will be a shame for Israel. It will make our army look as a second-rate army.
Meanwhile, the government is under enormous pressure from the families of the hostages to give in to the terrorists' demands.
The Prime Minister saw a representative group and revealed that the government had decided to negotiate with the hijackers to secure the release of all of the hostages and was ready to release some terrorists held in Israeli jails in return.
Their message was, do whatever we can to meet the terrorist demand and free our fathers or mothers and relatives.
Secretly, the military planners work according to the new guidelines set by the Prime Minister.
One, it should be a complete surprise. B, the time that planes will land and the military operation will start should be limited to a specific number of minutes.
But they still don't have a plan of action. It's decided to try to pressure Idi Amin to solve the crisis one more time. An old Israeli friend of the Ugandan president calls him.
So he called him early morning. He said, you remember you told me once that your mother told you to help the people of Jerusalem. And that's your chance. Those people that are being kept in your terminal are your guests. But if you will not take good care of them, you might pay a price for it.
The calls convince Israeli leaders that their only remaining option is a daring military raid. But negotiating may allow them to buy more time to solve their big problem. The planners are hampered by a lack of intelligence.
We got Super 8 films and photographs. They gave us information about the distances. We were watching TV. Amin was coming in every evening to see them. So intelligence was coming in slowly, but this wasn't operational intelligence.
On Wednesday, less than 24 hours before the deadline they've set for executions expires, the hijackers release the non-Israeli hostages and allow them to fly back to Paris. It's their first mistake.
We send a team to Paris to interview them. Find out as much as we can details of what is taking place at the terminal.
This is a critical breakthrough. The released passengers provide them with information about the number of terrorists, Ugandan troops helping them, and the exact location of the hostages. With the new intelligence, the odds that the raid may work improve.
We were sure that coming to Entebbe from out of the blue, and Entebbe is so far away from Israel, and with our force we can finish it in less than 2 minutes.
Trying to gain that upper hand, attack the enemy on your terms, and trying to achieve that element of surprise, and that was probably the greatest thing they had going for them.
Then another piece of encouraging news arrives. Only hours before the executions are due to begin in Entebbe, the hijackers agree to extend the deadline.
We needed time to keep quiet and to keep the attention around the negotiations. If the slightest rumor or indication will leak that we have a military intention, we lost it.
They are still missing a critical piece of intelligence, a detailed image of the terminal.
We asked somebody from, that was at that time in Kenya, not an Israeli, to try to fly above the airport by a small plane and try to take pictures where exactly the Air France plane is parked and as much as information he could get from that. And he was able to do that and transfer those photos to us. So altogether, we had quite a clear idea where the hostages are being kept, what is the logistics of the airport, where can a plane land, where's exactly the commercial runway of the airport. There was also a military section of the airport.
The top-secret Israeli counter-terrorism team, simply known as the Unit, have been put on high alert since the crisis began. It's time to mobilize the troops.
It's a very special unit. It's the cream of the crop. It was developed over the years to carry out intelligence and counter-terrorism operations. And others we call the long arm of the IDF.
The unit has built its mystique by carrying out the most daring missions, operating behind enemy lines and rescuing hostages.
It has this significant reputation because it took part in many special operations.
Like other Black Ops units around the world, the unit's operators have to go through a grueling selection camp to join. The few who pass it are invited to join the team.
The first and foremost attribute or feature is determination.
The operators need a combination of skills: physical ability, intelligence, good technical skills and social skills, because it's teamwork.
Only a few of the unit's operations have ever been made public. Among them, rescuing hostages from terrorists who hijacked a Sabina airline flight in 1972. When the plane arrived in Tel Aviv, the troops pretended to be technicians coming to fix the plane. They then stormed it and rescued all the passengers. In Operation Spring of Youth in Lebanon in 1973, the unit's troops avenged the killing of Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympics.
We came from the sea, came in with the Navy SEALs. We were dressed as tourists. Ehud Barak was my partner. He was dressed as a woman. We got to the heart of Beirut and took out 3 terrorist leaders in retaliation.
I thought those boys, if there is somebody in the world that can do it, they will do it. And they are ready to pay with their life with the slightest hesitation.
The unit is the best chance Israel has. But they only have hours to come up with a plan. If they fail, the terrorists will deliver on their threat and start executing passengers. In the army's headquarters in Tel Aviv, one plan that initially seemed like an outlandish idea is starting to take shape. Sending a strike force 2,000 miles away and storming the terminal under the cover of darkness.
The plan was to send 4 planes. The first land 7 minutes ahead of the others.
Joshua Shani will be the lead pilot. He will fly the assault team, 29 Matkal soldiers led by Yoni Netanyahu. With him is Muki Betzer, who was part of the group that planned the operation. To add to the element of surprise, the Special Forces team assembles a convoy of official-looking vehicles.
CBS showed a couple of times Idi Amin coming with a Mercedes with 2 Land Rover Jeeps to visit the terminal, to visit the hostages. We started saying, why wouldn't we do the same?
1 Mercedes and 2 Land Rovers. We will all be dressed up as Ugandans, basically staging the arrival of Idi Amin or another dignitary, as they did every night. The plan is to get there and completely surprise them, storm the terminal, take out the terrorists, and release the hostages.
The rest of the force, another 200 top infantrymen and paratroopers, hand-picked for the mission, will arrive in the other 3 Hercules planes.
The other 3 will wait 7 minutes in a holding pattern just south of an around the border of Kenya and Uganda, just to make sure that we will keep the maximum surprise, minimum noise.
They will land in 7-minute intervals. Their job, to secure the airport, fight back any retaliation, and provide backup for the rescue team. The unit's senior operators are assembled. Amir Offer is at home, just days before finishing his mandatory service with the unit.
It was a very frightening phone call, I must admit. I was told, come immediately to your base. All of us were very worried. It was a very dangerous operation.
Practice begins. They need to be ready for every potential scenario.
Our planning seemed perfect, with a high probability that throughout the journey, the landing, and the raid on the terminal, we will be able to maintain the surprise element.
Israel's leaders and top military commanders are invited to observe a dress rehearsal on an improvised model of the terminal.
When you decide an operation, you have to take a risk. The question is it a reasonable risk? I wouldn't do it to commit suicide. And when I saw the boys, I saw the preparation, my self-assurance grew up.
At the end of the rehearsal, the Chief of Staff wants to know what are their chances of succeeding.
He collected all the commanders together after the rehearsal. He asked each of us to say if we believe in the plan or not. All of us said that 70 to 80% it would fail. But we decided to go.
When you have the type of well-trained personnel and some of the ground forces are exceptionally well-trained, you do what you have to do in order to, to accomplish the mission.
The hijackers' new deadline is approaching fast. Perez, the Minister of Defense, needs to convince Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin to green light the risky operation.
He struggled with that decision for a day and a night. He told me that he hardly slept.
I wanted to carry out the mission. I wanted to do it. I saw that it's possible. I wanted to be a part of it. And I was very anxious to get airborne and get out and do it. And we were sitting there waiting for an approval.
5 days into the crisis, on Friday, encouraged by the latest developments, Rabin, who is a former general, is persuaded.
He accompanied me to the elevators and said to me, Amos, if the military operation will fail, and the chances are 50-50, I will resign the following day.
Prime Minister Rabin wants the entire government to sign off on what has been until now a secret plan. As time is running out, 200 of Israel's top fighters are taking off to Africa, ready to carry out the daring rescue raid now codenamed Operation Thunderbolt. The final go or no-go will be given while they are in the air.
We took off to the mission without the final approval of the government.
The assault teams had less than 24 hours to prepare before changing to Ugandan uniforms, their operational disguise as they attempt to pass themselves off as an official escort to Idi Amin's motorcade.
I was totally sure that no one will approve the operation. It will be cancelled within a few hours. It was too risky, too far. It was a crazy operation.
The troops are getting a quick last-minute briefing.
Yoni Netanyahu, which was our commander, explained that we have a very short time to prepare the operation. Therefore, we will not discuss any activities of other forces. He just told each one of us what's a specific role of each squad.
Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, an emergency cabinet meeting is called. Unless all ministers approve the plan, the troops will be called back. the Hercules planes have been in the air for nearly 2 hours when a message arrives. Operation Thunderbolt is a go.
Given that the consequence of both failure and success for the state of Israel, I think it was a very, very tough call, but it was one they had to make.
In Entebbe, for the hostages, the situation seems hopeless.
We couldn't even, for 1%, think that the Israelis are coming to save us there. No way. We didn't know what's going on in Israel. Nobody was talking to us.
The deadline for executions to begin approaches.
Every few hours they said that they are going to execute us, each and every one of us. I remember that my thought was I would like to be one of the first because I couldn't think seeing the others being killed.
It was despairing, not giving any hope.
The 4 Hercules planes head north, then turn south, flying over the Red Sea and over to Africa. In the cockpit, lead pilot Joshua Shani feels the burden of responsibility.
The fear was from failure, real fear, big fear. 29 years old, it's all on my shoulder, and if I screw it up, this is a national disaster.
The journey is some 2,200 miles long, and it involves crossing hostile airspace. If detected, they could be shot down.
We kept radio silence because we didn't want anybody from the enemy countries next to us to listen.
To avoid getting detected, they fly as low as only 100 feet above the sea, making the journey a rough one. Even so, some of the troops use the time to prepare.
I loaded my AK-47 and I opened the safety pin, and my friend who was sitting beside me shouted at me, "You are not supposed to open your safety pin to load the weapon within a plane." I told him, "Shut up, this is a real war."
Others, like Martin Vellani, the operation's deputy commander, and Yoni Netanyahu, the unit's commander, managed to catch a few minutes of sleep.
Both of us occupied this bed with full gear and weapons. We tried to sleep. It's a long flight.
I found very difficult to understand how a guy that's going to storm and his chances to get killed are 50% can sleep like a baby, and he did sleep like a baby.
Just as they get to the border of Kenya and Uganda, the pilots break formation and separate. Shani, carrying the attack force, continues directly towards Entebbe, while the others reach the airport from another direction. The aim is to time their arrival to maximize the potential surprise.
Very dangerous, flying into an airfield that enemy forces are controlling with aircraft that are essentially unarmed. They didn't have cover, didn't have gunships covering them to be able to come in, land.
When we had to pick up the time of landing, we knew it should be the middle of the night sometime.
As the plane approaches Entebbe Airport, the control tower, anticipating another arriving flight, asks the plane to identify itself. Shani's answer could seal the fate of the mission.
In broken English, they start asking questions. And our captain, he gave the right answer.
Shani manages to pass as another incoming flight without raising suspicion, and his plane lands at 11:01 p.m. Uganda time, right on schedule. The rest of the force, 200 troops, should arrive within the next 15 minutes.
When I was at approximately 1,000 feet over the lake, I saw the lights of the runway very clear. And all of a sudden, I was relieved. The flight was behind me. I was in the formation. I was exactly on time. The runway is in front of me. Piece of cake. And then, when I was at 300 feet, approximately 300 feet, all of a sudden, the lights went off. Complete darkness. My first officer unbuckled his harness, stood up, peered through the windows, looking for any clue. Where is the runway?
But until then, the Matkal operators are on their own.
Of the intelligence that we got was that there are between 200 and 1,000 soldiers in this specific airbase. And we were supposed to be alone for about 7 to 10 minutes. When you think that you are 29 against, let's say, 1,000 and about 8 to 15 terrorists, it's a crazy operation.
Everything goes according to the plan.
I taxied all the way almost to the old terminal, where the hostages were held.
While the plane is still taxiing, the assault force gets into the official-looking vehicles to pose as Amin's motorcade. The next moments are critical. They have to get right up to the terminal without being detected.
We jumped out with the Mercedes. The air was fresh right after the rain. We're driving slowly, adjusting our speed to our surroundings.
In the Mercedes are Betzer and Netanyahu, the commanders of the assault. Behind, the rest of the force in Land Rovers, pretending to be an official escort.
I remember these two feelings. One is a feeling of terrible loneliness, and the second is that I saw 29 shadows of people or soldiers holding their weapons in the darkness. And I thought to myself, how many of these will stay alive in 5 minutes?
The success of the entire operation depends on maintaining the surprise and on no one daring to stop the president's convoy.
We look straight ahead, and we see 2 Ugandan soldiers standing there, a little bored.
The troops have only seconds to react.
The guy yells, "Advance!" I tell Yoni, forget it, it's routine. But he hesitates for a second and then says, "Take them out."
There was a burst of non-silenced fire, and at this moment, it was obvious that the element of surprise gone.
I thought this is when the slaughter begins.
Their cover is blown. They are exposed and outnumbered and still more than 200 meters away from their target. The hijackers could start executing hostages immediately. Hundreds of lives are on the line.
We jumped off and started running. And as we are running, a Ugandan soldier opens fire right above us. And I shoot around him, hitting him in the chest, and he drops. Any Ugandan soldier we see is shot. There was massive shooting.
The Ugandan soldiers are confused.
Ugandans in general always view Israel and Israelis as special people on earth. And any confrontation with them is as if you are confronting children, special children of God. So in that view, our soldiers were saying, the children of God has come. So anything to do with God to Ugandans, that was beyond human control.
Inside the terminal, the hostages are terrified. They don't know who is shooting or why.
I thought the terrorists will shoot, the Ugandan soldiers will shoot, and we will be dead in a few minutes.
They were shooting, terrible shooting all around. Noises, shouting, lights, everything. We were sure that that's the end. It comes now.
Everything now depends on how quickly the assault force can get to the hostages.
It was critical to enter as fast as possible.
Amir Offer is the first inside the terminal.
I couldn't see my commander, and I was sure that he already ran and he disappeared in the darkness, and I must run as fast as I can in order to catch up with him and to cover his back.
He is on his own, with no cover.
Someone was shooting in the terminal about 5 meters inside it, and he was holding an AK-47, and he was shooting at me directly. You know, I could see his hands like this because he was shooting a huge burst of fire.
His Special Forces training kicks into action.
The bullets were one here and one there, and I simply didn't care. I just shot him accurately 3 or 4 bullets, and, you know, tuck, 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 and that's it.
The rest of the team catch up. As they move through the terminal, they see 2 men dressed as civilians. They don't realize they are terrorists until one soldier notices a spark.
They shouted, "They have a grenade," and they shoot them. And
the assault team is now together. They continue to sweep the terminal.
there were 2 other terrorists. They turned their rifle to shoot me in the back. Within 5 seconds, I was supposed to die twice.
Next, the troops advance into the passengers' hall.
We were scanning the whole room with our eyes, looking for more terrorists.
The hostages have no idea who these soldiers are.
It was very frightening moments. It looks like hours. And we didn't understand what is going on.
In my left hand, I put the loudspeaker. My right hand was still on the trigger. And I said, "Everybody lie down." They were totally sure that they are now going to be executed.
In the confusion, one hostage, Jean-Jacques Maimoni, excited to be rescued, leaps to his feet.
He jumped against my explicit instruction to lie down, and he was mistakenly considered to be a terrorist who is jumping in order to run and activate a bomb or whatever, and he was shot.
I shouted to him not to move, but he didn't hear me. There was already too much noise from the shooting. Then I wanted to pull him with his foot, but there was too many bullets around. He jumped to say, "Wonderful for saving me."
Maimoni is one of the 3 hostages killed in the crossfire. The hostages start to realize what is happening.
They started to raise a little bit their heads and just, to look from the bottom, from the floor, to look up. And suddenly they identified, or they understood that they're not going to be killed, that someone came to rescue them. And it's an amazing moment.
It's like if there was an angel coming out of the sky. It was such a surprise.
By now, the rest of the Israeli force has landed and is battling the Ugandan army outside. The Hercules pilots are waiting in the dark.
They were shooting all over the place, tracers, and I couldn't tell if they are aiming to us or not. One bullet at the right place, the airplane is grounded. You cannot take off.
Inside the terminal, the assault force needs to report to the unit's commander that the team has eliminated the hijackers' threat.
I call Yoni on the radio and I say, "Mission completed." "Yoni," I say, "completed." Just like in the rehearsal. Nothing. The unit's communications officer picks up. He's yelling, "Yoni is hurt. Yoni is hurt."
Yoni Netanyahu, Matkal's commander, has been critically injured. There's no time to digest the news. They're still not out of danger.
The soldiers told us to go out, to follow the lights outside to the Hercules, and we started to run.
They only have minutes before the Ugandan army regroups.
Amin's reaction was furious. He regretted that he had been duped by Colonel Balev, that they were negotiating with a view to peaceful exchanges. Yet the Israelis had been having double planning. That kind of thing, to my view, annoyed him more.
The hostages and the troops are still at least 8 hours away from home in a hostile country.
My issue was at that time to make sure that we can get the hell out of there.
The evacuation must begin.
We had to count the soldiers a million times just to make sure we are not leaving anyone behind. It was so critical. And when we felt everybody that was ready took off.
But not everyone is on the plane. Ilan Hartou's elderly mother was taken to a Ugandan hospital the night before.
I said I had a mother who was in hospital 30 miles away, of course, 30 kilometers away. Of course, I knew they couldn't get there. There was no time for them to go and save her. But I told them to try to speak with whoever they can. And the people in the plane told me that Africans usually are very respectful to old women.
The Israeli force needs to make sure they can't be pursued by the Ugandan army. A demolition team moves in to destroy the entire fleet of MiG fighter planes. On the way home, the troops learn that the unit's commander, Yoni Netanyahu, has died.
I went out to the back of one of the aircraft and I saw Yoni lying there. He was covered with an aluminium blanket. And I looked at it and I think about Yoni. In military operations, the price is always human life.
"2,000 miles away, the government in Jerusalem is waiting for an update.
I was at my office. It was, I think, 12 o'clock at night. That was the first time that the silence was broken. And we got a code which says that one of our commanders fallen. Somehow, my heart told me it's Yoni, whom I loved very much.
While the Hercules planes are still in the air, news of the secret has leaked out.
We turn on the long-range radio and I put it on the loudspeaker so the special forces will hear. It started with a French television station that said, Israeli commando just did this operation.
After another 7 hours journey, and a week after the hijacking, the 4 planes carrying the troops, the hostages, and the dead are finally back home in Israel.
Everybody, all our friends, all of them were there.
It was unbelievable. I thought that the whole country is waiting for us in the airport. Lots and lots and lots of people.
The pilots can finally relax.
When you have this kind of responsibility, you function. Adrenaline is so high, you just function and you don't know how. I totally collapsed when I got home.
But Matkal, the secret Black Ops unit, cannot take part in the celebrations. For many years to come, its missions and the operators who carried them out will remain in the shadows.
We were isolated and taken aside because it was top secret at the time. I think that there was one moment later on that I understood that we did something, I would say, extraordinary.
Amin took his revenge on Dora Bloch, the elderly hostage who was taken earlier to the hospital.
After the operation ended, kind of a retaliation, Idi Amin gave an order to the doctors at the hospital to kill her. And that's what took place.
We waited 3 years until we heard that the remains body was there, found there, and she was brought to Israel to be buried in Israel.
They know this is a sacred mission. They felt that only they can do it, only they have to do it, only they have to take the risk.
It was not God that worked overtime. It was just we did a good job like we were expected to do.
The daring raid and the courage of the troops who carried it out would be studied by forces all around the world and serve as a model for what special ops teams could achieve. The Israelis' overwhelming retaliation to the hijackers is an early international victory in the war on terrorism.